My name's Chris Cronin, and I'm going to be sort of tonight's moderator for the call. I'm a board member at Build the Era, and Build the Era is a transportation advocacy group, and our goal is to help Americans understand the work of our Department of Transportation. We also advocate for smart and equitable investments by the DOT, and we promote multimodal planning throughout our communities. We want to thank everybody for being here and for helping to contribute to the attainment of our vision and mission, and also for living our rules of road safety. And if you want more information on our organization, visit buildtheera.com. And we also have news on upcoming presentations like this one, and you can sign up to receive our newsletter and e-blasts. We have a variety of different speakers throughout the year on topics from trains, planes, automobiles, e-bikes. We've covered a lot of different things in the transportation sector, but tonight I'm really excited because I've been a fan of Fidelco Guide Dogs for quite a few years. They're just over the border from me in Connecticut, and they're not only doing good work training guide dogs, they're also doing really good work supporting the community. They're very community minded. So I met them through public television years ago. So tonight's discussion will focus on how the Fidelco Guide Dog Foundation oversees the whole process of training dogs from pup to partner. And we'll also discuss how Fidelco pioneered the in-community placement of dogs to ensure clients and dogs can function well within the community, at work, and at home. And we'll also be discussing some of the challenges people with service animals face navigating the transportation sector. So again, please hold your questions to the end or put them in the chat. And when Gretchen's done presenting, we'll try to address as many as we can. Just also a reminder, and I think everybody's all set, just to mute your microphone if you haven't done that already. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Gretchen Fisher Orr, a certified guide dog mobility instructor at Fidelco Guide Dog Foundation. She has 20 years of experience and currently works in admissions and client services at Fidelco. She provides educational opportunities related to blindness and visual impairment for Fidelco apprentice instructors. She lives happily with her husband and a small menagerie of pets, including a parrot and 3 dogs. And at this time, I'm happy to turn the presentation over to Gretchen, who I believe has a couple of friends joining her in her room on the call.
I have to say, we have a dog matter going on this evening.
No.
Well, so I was not able to bring my dogs, but once I get started, I'm going to bring a large photo that you'll all be able to see of the one puppy I raised when I became an accidental puppy raiser.
Oh, cool.
So normally people sign up for that, including staff members, but I sort of fell into this one. So I will bring you him. I'm super proud of what I did with him. And I'm so excited. We have 2 other guide dog mobility instructors here tonight. I'm very excited. So nice to see you all.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Gretchen.
Okay, terrific. So what I'd like to do, there were some questions that came up ahead of time that people sent in. So I will do my best to answer those and or provide resources where you can get more information. Some of the questions that people submitted are actually worthy of multi-day seminars that I've gotten CEUs on. So there's no way I could possibly answer them here. And they're ongoing problem-solving issues in our society today with transportation and traffic and pedestrians and everything. So that's why I've got some resources that I will share. I'll talk a little bit. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the time. So if I get too carried away, Chris, feel free to prompt me. I'm going to talk a little bit first about guide dogs in general. And then I'll talk a little bit about Fidelco. I'll also talk, there's a lot that goes on at Fidelco that goes on in every guide dog school. So some of this is just really common to every guide dog school. And then I'm going to go into some of the questions that people asked as best I can, given the time that we have. I'd really like to thank you for having Fidelco here tonight and for having me here. It's really terrific to be able to educate people about what guide dogs do, because a lot of people still ask the instructor questions at the curb when we're waiting to cross the street, like, can the dog see the traffic light, or does the dog know when it turns, when the pedestrian signal comes on? And so a lot of people don't know what guide dogs do. In general, guide dogs in the United States began with actually the seeing eye back in the early, like we're into well over 100 years ago now. Fidelco is one of many schools in the United States. There are about 12 various sizes. We're a smaller school. At Fidelco, our specialty is German Shepherd dogs. We began as a breeding organization of German Shepherd dogs, Mr. and Mrs. Kaman, Roberta and Charlie Kaman, in 1960. And they had gone over to Germany for other purposes, for work, and brought back herding dogs that were actually, farm herding shepherds, and brought them back because the shepherd at that time in this country was really struggling with temperament and had already begun the hip dysplasia question. So they went to get working dogs, and they brought them back, and they donated them to guide dog schools. They provided them to police. They sold some for pets. But then in 1981, they decided, Charlie Kaman is an entrepreneur. He invented the Ovation guitar and founded that company. Also Kaman Aerospace, with the double rotor lifter that they make. And so one of the things was that once their dogs were donated, they didn't really have a way to manage what happened after that. Like, if they knew somebody they thought would be a good candidate, that was all up to the school to sort that out, because when you make a donation, generally the school sorts out what is the outcome. So and also people at the time, the only mode of placement to get a dog was to go to the campus of the school and stay in the dormitory and stay there for 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the program. And they didn't like that because they knew people who needed dogs, and they didn't want them to have to leave Connecticut and leave their homes. So they hired an instructor who was British, and he brought with him from where he had learned in Europe the in-community placement process, which is the instructor goes and brings the dog to the person. And these days we cover more than just Connecticut. So that means if it's far enough, the instructor would stay in a hotel nearby, and it takes about 2 weeks. It works for us. It doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for every school. And that's why most of the schools are campus based. But those are the two unique features. We have only German Shepherds, which are not very common in the guide dog industry. And we have only in community placement. To obtain a guide dog in the United States at any of the schools, you have to be legally blind, and you have to have attended orientation and mobility training from Services for the Blind, because it is you, the navigator, who has to know where you're going, because the dogs are amazing and they do all kinds of abstract reasoning all the time, all day long, and they're the one who sees the full environment first of the pair, because even if somebody has some remaining vision, they're still legally blind. And they just really do some amazing problem solving, but they are dogs. So they are not able to, understand traffic intersections. They don't know where you need to go. They don't know if today you're going somewhere different or you're taking a different route. You can't say, please take me to the bank. So the dog is actually, another type of amazing and living and thinking partner, who's also a mobility tool in a way, because you put your cane in your back pocket, and then you pick up the handle, and the dog will guide you around obstacles, around pedestrians. They'll help you and that dog will problem solve around construction, around other obstacles, street crossings. You will have to decide when to cross. You have to already have that skill from your orientation and mobility training. But then the dog can certainly look for, is there a car coming right here? But they also can look across the street and see exactly where the up curb is. So you can the dog will take you directly to the up curb. They'll take you directly to a door. They'll take you directly to the stairs you want. So it's for people, it's not a good fit for everybody, but for people who are a good fit for a guide dog, it's a very efficient form of travel. Again, it doesn't work for everybody. A very small percentage of people use guide dogs compared to people who are actually probably white cane travelers. But that's the relationship. It's a closely intertwined, very intimate partnership that happens, and a good team who's been together for a while can really read each other. But the person is the navigator, and they have the responsibility of how to get there, when to get there. The structure of the program at Fidelco is a lot like everybody else's. We have our own breed dogs. They live in homes. They don't live in a kennel. They live in volunteer homes. Puppies are whelped, born in our facility in the pup house, which is separate from the rest of the facility because we don't want cross-contamination for unvaccinated puppies who don't have complete immune systems yet. From there, when they're old enough, about 8 weeks old, they go to puppy raiser homes, volunteers in the community who give of their hearts, their time, their love, and they do extraordinary work with our support, of course, in raising and properly socializing these dogs. It's a lot more work than raising a pet. I've had pets my whole life. I've also trained guide dogs for about 20 years. You know what? It's a lot more work for a volunteer to raise a puppy than it is for most of us to have a pet. Because of all the preparation that has to be done. The dogs come into training at Fidelco, it's about 18 months old. That differs from one school to another, but for us, it's about 18 months old. Our training program is 6 to 8 months long. Again, that differs from one school to another, depending on their program and also the breed they use. So that dog is assigned to a trainer. A trainer typically has 4 to 6 dogs, occasionally more if it gets real busy. And for those 4 to 6 months, that trainer works Monday through Friday. That instructor works Monday through Friday, training that dog, sometimes on weekends, in a lot of different locations. In Connecticut, we have a lot around us directly to train environments, but we have to go to Boston for a subway or New York to subway. We can go to New Haven for a train, and we can go to occasional pick up a train in Windsor, which is great, and ride it up to, or Hartford, and ride it up to Springfield, I think. And we had a question about public transportation. So how do the dogs get trained for public transportation? The public transportation happens much later in the program. So that's in layers. First, the dog has to know how to guide you. The dog has to already know how to guide you around obstacles, around pedestrians. The dog already has to have learned, when you get to the stairs, what the procedure is. So you don't all end up over tea kettle down the stairs. They have to have all of these skills before we can bring them on a train or a bus or a subway. And they will have already ridden a bus, local buses in Hartford with the instructors just to ride. So, so that's, we start by just letting them, they have all these other skills, but we start out by just letting them experience it. Some of them may have ridden a bus before, but most of them haven't. So we let them experience it. And eventually we put all those skills together. So, somebody can go to, have the bus pull up and say, find inside or find the door. The dog will take them up the stairs. They will get on the bus. They can say, find the seat. The dog will take them to an empty seat. They and the dog together will kind of tuck the dog out of the way, and off they go. And that's the same of trains and subways also. So, it's a 6 to 8, the dog's not going to get on public transportation until they've probably been in training for a good 4 months. So we're way into the process by then. And I've already talked, I've got here, how do guide dogs work? I've talked a little bit about that already. I'll talk, how do you get a guide dog? I'll talk about the admissions process. So in the US, you have to be considered legally blind. And depending on the program, some programs focus on people who have more vision loss or are more like totally blind. Other programs have specialties such as people who have deaf blindness, not just blindness. There are some programs that specialize more in people with a couple of different kinds of, maybe somebody uses a support cane or something when they walk. So, but in general, you've got to be legally blind, and you have to have completed your orientation mobility training with your local services for the blind. And you have to have, you also have to have places you're going on foot. The dogs need work. Their skills will fade if they don't get to use those skills, and they were bred for work. And so, you're going to get a less attentive dog. And a less safe dog because the skills will not be sharp. So if you're somebody who may be very independent as a person who has a visual impairment, but you tend to be more likely to be the person who's going to walk out the door, hop on that bus, take the bus downtown, maybe grab an Uber somewhere. I mean, if you're going everywhere, that's your own version of independence. But guide dogs need to be worked out on the street, most days. They need pedestrian work because that's where their real job especially is. Indoors is a lot easier for them. It's the outdoors that really challenges them. And those are the skills where people could get really injured if the dog doesn't have really good working skills. So you want those people who are going to be on foot. So every school, including Fidelco, has a process of interviewing people. People have to apply and meet the minimum qualifications. For us, we do a phone interview, and if that's me, and if it seems like they meet our minimum requirements, I'll send an application out, a lot of forms, including medical. We do an in-person interview. Somebody from our school comes out to interview the person in person. That's what worked best for us. Other schools might use video, a combination of video and phone interview. We are not the only school who does in-person interviews. And then that application then gets reviewed. And if the person gets into the program, if they're accepted, then there is a wait list. Every school has a wait list. There's no way to be accepted and then get a guide, quickly in most cases. Bill, I see some questions popping up. Do you want me to hang on to those until, because I'm going to leave a space for questions at the end?
Yeah, that's what we told everyone to do, Gretchen.
I want to make sure. Thank you, Chris. Yep. I want to make sure. So an important question that I really wanted to address is, what are the differences between service dogs and other types of support animals? So a guide dog is a kind of service dog. In the United States, now you have to think about service dogs exist internationally, but not every country has what I'm about to describe to you. So what I'm describing to you specifically pertains to the United States. And that is a service dog, of which a guide dog is one of them, is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. That means that dog is allowed to be in public. That person with their dog is allowed to have access to places that the rest of the public has access to. There is no registration of a service dog. So anybody who sees those internet things that say, send us $75 and we'll get your service dog certified and registered for you, we'll send the ID, that's all bogus. Because according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, there is no certification required as far as, there's no legal process. You have to register with the government or some entity to say it's a service dog. It does have to meet a lot of training requirements. Otherwise, a business can say your dog can't come in because it's not properly behaved. A business or an entity can ask a person only two questions. Does your dog have a job, and what does it have? Is your dog a trained service dog, and does that dog do tasks for you? According to the ADA, the animal has to be trained to do specific tasks. They cannot ask you what your disability or disease is. They cannot ask you to show me what the dog does. But one of the hallmarks of service dogs is they're exceedingly well behaved in public. Sometimes there are difficulties, and at that point, as a guide dog instructor, I'm hoping that if a client or a graduate of our program runs into difficulty with their dog, they're having, some kind of problem in the field, they'd be contacting us so we can help them. Typically, the hallmarks of an actual working service dog, they're extremely well behaved. You often don't even know that they're there. They might be labeled service dog, they might not be. It's not a federal requirement to label your dog as a service dog. So Bill, here's a good place if you want to drop the link about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. People can, I'm sure we can include them at the end, but if you want to drop it, this is a good place where it's just a link where you can go and read about the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically relating to service dogs. So you can, so that means if you have a working service dog, you should be able to take that dog anywhere with you. We have guide dog users who have taken their dog into the hospital with them when they've had to go in hospital stays. They're in doctor's offices, they're in the dentist's office, they're everywhere you can imagine, and they should be really disappearing. So just sort of, if they're not actually doing their job, they're usually standing quietly, sitting quietly, or laying down. The Americans with Disabilities Act also has a provision, and a lot of people don't realize this, that if the dog is not groomed properly, not behaving properly, not acting like it's house trained, barking, lunging, growling, any of those things, that entity can ask the guide dog user or service dog user to remove their dog from the premises. They can't say, I'm not going to serve you. They can say, I can't serve you with your dog in here. You have to put the dog somewhere else, whether that means a companion brings it home, whether you leave and come back another day without the dog is not allowed to stay here. And they do, so that's part of the ADA also. So when dogs are not legitimate service dogs, it's pretty common that they're not acting like service dogs, right? They're cute and they're sitting in a shopping cart, or they're, lunging around at the end of the leash in a store, or they're barking, or something is happening that they don't like. Trained guide dog and service dog are exceedingly professional. So that's something. And again, if a team is having trouble, they should be contacting their school or whoever trained the dog to get support in case things aren't, are going, if there are some rough patches, because that can happen. It's dogs and people, animals and people. So that's how that is. That's for all service dogs, including guide dogs. An emotional support dog is only covered in the United States under the Fair Housing Act. You do not need to have a certified emotional support dog to get you in public. They're not supposed to be in public. An emotional support dog or an emotional assistance dog, their only purpose it exists in the Fair Housing Act. As a homeowner, if I wanted a dog for emotional support, I don't need anybody's permission. With the Fair Housing Act, if you're renting, then there is a provision that your assistance dog, which is also a service dog, or your emotional support dog would be covered. And that, for an emotional support dog, it also has to be well behaved, housebroken, not a nuisance, and not aggressive, or the landlord could ask that dog to please be removed from the premises. And that comes with a doctor's letter. That's how you work that. But that is only in your own apartment. So in public, when people are talking about how this is my emotional support dog is not covered under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's meant to be a landlord and tenant issue with a doctor's note. And it also has provisions of good behavior. So then when people talk about therapy dogs, a therapy dog is the kind of dog who loves strangers and loves people and is usually calm and a joy to be around. And they're the kind of dog who wants to go to nursing homes, children's hospitals, schools. They are, when you see if there's been a tragedy in the news and they talk about support dogs going, generally those are therapy dogs going to provide support. They visit campuses, they visit airports. Bradley International Airport has a team of therapy certified dogs, and those are generally through organizations that certify therapy dogs. They're not for profits because you have to be covered by liability insurance. If you're going to walk into a hospital with a dog, you better be covered with liability insurance if it's not a trained service dog. I will also mention a psychiatric service dog is not the same as an emotional support animal or dog. Emotional support helps you feel better. Psychiatric service dog gets you medication, can interfere with a mental health episode, has a lot of very specific tasks, whereas an emotional support dog just helps us feel better. And that, that's a function that some dogs do serve, again, not ADA, not in public. So that's sort of the short version of that. A lot of businesses, even if they think a dog is a fake service dog, they don't want to ask them to leave, because then you get a lot of public outcry with social media. I mean, it can get really crazy. So a lot of people don't want, a lot of businesses don't want to ask that. One more question before I dive off into the couple of questions that people have sent in related to transportation. So how do people with limited income pay for food and veterinary care? Does insurance cover this? So food and other miscellaneous supplies, most people who apply for a guide dog are able to afford food and basic expenses. And that can be somebody who it doesn't work because of their disability. So just because you don't, you may not be working because of your disability doesn't mean you don't have enough money to pay for a dog, because, your whole picture might look different then. So the person has to provide in the United States for the food and miscellaneous supplies. Some guide dog users have family members who help them. Maybe they're in a more stable financial position, and they can say, legally I will be responsible, whatever. And we, you know, guide dog schools are concerned about the dog, certainly, but they're also concerned about the person because this is a team. So if somebody is a very limited income and they give the dog the best of care, what's happening to their own self-care? Are they eating correctly? Are they getting the care they need? You know, are they taking care of themselves? So it's really a team perspective. So veterinary care, some schools are able to provide some kind of assistance for that, especially if people live nearby. With the larger schools, if you live nearby, you might be able to make use of their veterinary services, but it's not a guaranteed part of any any guide dog program. And I know at Fidelco, we're a small school. So like small schools, we do not have a veterinary, you know, support program. There aren't funds for anything like that. Pet insurance in the United States is available. We always say to people, we strongly recommend it. Get your dog set up with pet insurance when you get your dog. Some people also live near veterinary hospitals that provide care for free for working dogs. Other veterinarians might provide discounted care for dogs. So there are a lot of ways to tackle that. You know, again, it's not a state or a federal program. These are all not-for-profits, and we're all different. We all are accredited. Most schools in the US are accredited by the International Guide Dog Federation. And so, you know, but we're all different entities. So let's see, I'm going to look quick through my notes here. Okay. So that.
Are you ready for questions?
I was going to go through the very few questions that you have here, most of which I cannot answer.
All right. Well, then why don't we start with the questions people have just asked, and then let's go to the other questions after. So
because the other questions can be answered with the resources also, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So,
okay.
The first question we had was, can any dog be a guide dog, and what breeds are commonly used for guide dogs?
Okay, that is an excellent question. Guide dogs, the job that a guide dog does is probably the work that a guide dog does probably it's the work that puts the most pressure on the dog. As far as the different types of service dog jobs, that animal is responsible for hundreds of decisions as they walk through every day. You know, it's not about going to get medication. It's not about opening a door. It's not about helping you balance. It's about active problem solving in an environment that the handler cannot see or cannot see very well at all. So there are a lot of, if you imagine walking down a city street, all the things that are going on, the dog has to sort that all out. So it puts a lot of pressure on a dog. So it's very uncommon in guide dogs anyway, that anything other than a purpose-bred dog would be successful at that, because of the specific temperament and resiliency required for that. There are organizations that use shelter dogs for different kinds of service dog work. Occasionally, guide dog schools have accepted donated dogs, but most of the time, the pressure is put on that dog really means it has to have a lot of resiliency and the right temperament that the schools have been breeding for many, many decades. Even with all that breeding, it's common, even with all that experience, all the medical genetics knowledge thrown at this, you know, this issue of how do we make guide dogs, it's not uncommon for schools to only have a 40 to 50% success rate, and the other dogs are career changed. And that's with decades worth of breeding. In the case of Seeing Eye, 100 years of breeding. So for us, it's over 50%. It's often over 60%. But we also we're a small school. We work with a unique breed in the guide dog industry. So we are willing to give them extra time. We are, you know, we have not some of the same kinds of pressures that some of the larger schools have. So it gives us a little bit of wiggle room, I think. But it is very common. The average is probably 50%. And that's with all this work.
Why do you train shepherds?
It's an excellent question. And I'm going to get back. This will tie into the breed question also that I see here. So we began as a German Shepherd breeding organization, and we're that organization for 40 years. So from 1960 to 1981, only bred German Shepherds for work and for family dogs. And for work like guide dog work or local, you know, state police patrol dog work, where that dog, it's not like the military. The dog is going home to be parts of people's families and be in towns. It's not the same as a military working dog. So when it got to be 1981, we placed our first 3 guide dogs that year in 1981. Shepherds are something Fidelco knows for now. What are we at? So that we're now at like, let me think, since we've been breeding, we're now at 80 years of experience breeding them with bloodlines. We've been with some of the ancestors, we've been working with the ancestry bloodlines for a long time, along with everything else we need to bring in. So this is what we know, and this is what we do well. There are a whole lot of other schools that know other breeds and do them well. And we are small. So as soon as we try to bring in other breeds, you know, if it takes all the resources we have to do what we currently do, as soon as we add one more breed, now we don't have any expertise in that breed. And so, yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as breeds, the most common breed is a Labrador Retriever. Probably the next common breed after that is the Golden Retriever. Shepherds are very low on the list, even though, you know, Buddy was the first guide dog in this country, in the United States, and then, you know, a German Shepherd. They have a lot. They have a lot of drive, so they're not always the best dog to. They have an amazing degree of focus, but they're not always the best dog. You figure they're a multi-purpose dog, that you want them to herd sheep, you want them to help keep the border. In some countries, you want them to be with the police, and you also want them to walk at a human pace and just not worry about any of those things. Not the sheep, not the police, not the people running around, not the person who's carrying weird bags looking suspicious. We now ask them to not worry about any of that and just please keep safety of the handler in mind as we're working through all of this. So it's a lot, you know, to ask a breed that was bred for multi-purpose. So yeah, so they're just not as common, you know, so you're always looking for better genetics and whatnot. And I see, does that answer that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the next question was what happens to the dogs that don't make it through the training program?
Oh, and this is where I'm supposed to show you my dog. Oh my goodness. So if you're a German Shepherd and you don't make it through the program, there's probably better than a 50% chance that it's because you said, can I jump over the 12-foot wall? And we said, we don't have a job like that. So you might move on to an organization or an agency that maybe trains sniffer dogs or works with local police for patrol dogs. So, because if you show up asking about the 12-foot high wall that you need to jump over, yeah, we don't have that job for you. We also career change dogs because maybe there's a medical issue that precludes them from being used as a working dog. There may be a behavior concern. Maybe they're too excited to see other dogs. Maybe they're uncomfortable around other dogs. The last dog we adopted from Fidelco, who is deceased now, he was an old man when we lost him. He was not good around children. He wanted to herd them incessantly, including nipping at their heels to keep them all together. That's not, again, I'm not a guide dog. And some dogs just really want to be pets. They think that the working job is a lot. They think it's just a bit much, especially because we're asking them to be guide dogs, and they think that's a lot. So, but I can show you a picture of her because we have our little bit of a dog calamity tonight. I will look for a good picture of our Shepherd. I brought her home in January. She thought the guide dog world was a bit much. She thought that it was a lot of work. It was a bit overwhelming. All those decisions were kind of a lot and the environment sometimes is overwhelming to dogs. Yeah. They might not like the noise.
Had you placed her with someone at that point, or it was just during training you realized?
Yeah, during training. The goal is always to remove the dog from training as early in the program as possible. Because, where is she? Here she is. Because it's time and resources, money, staff time. And we're also asking the dog to live in a kennel and be in this really hard training program. We ask a lot of them. They step up to the plate, but you know, why ask them to do that any longer than they have to? Yeah. Why spend my salary when I was an instructor trainer any more than we have to? Kennel resources, food, medical, everything. Okay, so I don't know if you all can see this.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so this is our dog, Ren. She is a lovely dog, and yeah, she said it was kind of a lot to be a guide in that, you know, out in the environment where there were a lot of things going on. So I'll be right back. I'm going to get you this one picture now. While
Okay.
we're talking about my dogs, so this guy is a successful guide dog now. So this is the dog my husband and I raised. He was 7 months old and needed puppy raiser wasn't working out. And so I started bringing him home just to make sure he didn't have to stay in the kennel because he was a puppy. And then it worked out and I just kept him. And I kept working with him. So, and then he became a guide dog. I brought him back like all the other puppy raisers, and there he was. That's our accidental guide dog. Never meant to be.
Is it hard, Gretchen, to let go of the dogs once you guys who are trainers have been working with them? Do you miss them?
Oh, I always missed the dogs I was working with. Well, okay, so there were a few that I thought were a lot of extra work, and I didn't mind them going to actually have a real job because sometimes they just need a real job and they need to move on from the trainer. But I always missed them. But you know what? It's not the same as the puppy raisers who invited them into their family and their hearts as if they were their own family, and gave them their love. They really miss them. There are a lot of tears over that, when it's goodbye day. I think I always missed them. I still miss some of them, but it's more like, I think where if you're anybody who's a teacher, you miss your kids when they leave you. And but they have other purposes.
Right.
And also by the time they're done training, they're starting to need a real job. They start to figure out that we can see and we don't really need them. So they get kind of like, well, I don't know if you really need me, it gets kind of a humdrum, the whole training routine after a while. So it's time to move on.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, Alyssa Ashworth said that the Alliance Foundation has mostly labs, retrievers, and poodles.
Poodles, I love that. So poodles are not very common in the guide dog industry. They're highly sought after because they don't shed as much, and so they have less dander. So people with allergies tend to do better with them. They're lovely dogs. They're lovely working dogs. There are also the occasional in the field boxers. There have been Doberman pinchers in the field. I don't think anybody's actively breeding boxers and Doberman pinchers right now, but yeah, poodles, we get calls to see if we have poodles. And at this point, it's hard for me to find another school to refer them to because right now I think there's a dip in the availability of them because they're not as common. Yeah.
Another question we had was, how do you travel with a guide dog on an airplane?
That's an excellent question. So the current process is that, and there are some links regarding air travel that I had sent to you all that you'll be able to do some reading on your own. Current status is that if I wanted to travel with a service dog, with my service dog or my guide dog, I would need to fill out, there's a Department of Transportation form that every airline has available. Every airline's a little bit different in how they manage the process, but you have to fill out this form with your information. If there's information from the school, which it came from, information about the dog, including the dog's weight, because, with planes, there's a whole weight math calculation they have to do regarding fuel and everything and how much the average passenger weighs and the luggage weighs and everything. So they ask the weight for that reason. And then you send that in. And then you hopefully get an email back that says you were approved. And then they, on the day of, and you have to do that, I think 2 days before your travel. When you get to the airport, you go to the customer assistance and they will process you there. So you don't go to the regular ticket counter. You give them, you keep your own copy of that. You give that to them. You give them your ID. They get you all checked in. And then you continue on to your, through TSA security, you get on your plane, and a small service dog, such as someone for maybe hearing or diabetes alert or things like that, those might sometimes be smaller. They could sit on a person's lap. A large dog, the way most service dogs are and all guide dogs are, they have to be at your feet. So I know you can tuck their rear end under the seat in front of you, and then their front half is at your feet. It's a little squishy, and then they usually put their chin on your lap. And sometimes fellow passengers are very accommodating, and if the dog sprawls out, they don't mind. But yeah, it's definitely a tight, squishy affair. I know when we have somebody who has applied and been accepted who flies regularly, we really work to give them an average sized dog and try to avoid giving them a larger dog. because it's a thing. Like, where do you put the dog on the airplane?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially because it's for hours. It's not just for a half-hour subway ride or bus ride or something.
Does the client have to buy like an extra seat for them, or probably not
No,
because
because they're not on the seat. They're in.
okay.
They like. Do you know when they come? Anybody who's flown, when they come through and they see you, say they say put your carry-on that you have with you under the seat in front of you, and that's also where you stick your feet as far as you can anyway. I don't know if anybody, they come through and they say that.
Yeah.
That is where the dog's rear end is.
Yeah, Lauren just posted a couple of pictures
Yeah.
of a dog like on a plane.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. And that reminds me, because I actually had to return a retired, well, soon to be retired dog to Fidelco for assessment. So as the instructor, we are able to, so if somebody were like, right now we have a client, an instructor working in California, so she flew out there with the dog. So as instructors, we can certainly, deliver a dog, bring it back to Fidelco or our guide dog school. I have here somewhere, it's lost in the thousands of too many pictures of dogs I have, but I have pictures just like that, except it's the shepherd with the ears. So yeah. And that is
now,
how
when do dogs retire? I mean, is it when they seem to lose interest, or when they get to be a certain age or have health issues, or
all of the above? And by the way, Lauren, I'd like to thank you for posting that. There was no way I could find my picture in here. And so I'm glad people can see that, because that is where their head sits between your knees or on your feet or something. So what happens, sometimes dogs, like people, end up with medical conditions that we didn't expect, and maybe they have to retire early. That can happen, or maybe they even pass away early. That can happen. Cancer is always an unfortunate thing in all of us. But typically, aside from any potential early retirement that may happen, or they might, a dog who does a lot of city work might need to retire a little sooner, because that's a ton of responsibility if you were in, downtown Manhattan or something. Typically what happens, it's a combination of age and the handler and the dog together. The handler notices the dog is maybe slowing down a little bit. Maybe it's getting harder for them to get up and down, or maybe they're just not as accurate as they were. Maybe they just seem like they really don't want to be out there anymore. Maybe it's practical. Maybe the light changes back before your dog gets you across the street because they've slowed down so much. Even if the dog wants to work, like the dog might want to work, but maybe it takes forever to get places. So there can be a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And that's generally a collaborative decision. Sometimes we get a call from a client that says, I think I have to retire my dog. I want to talk to you about it. I think I'd like to apply for another one or whatever. But also it can be very collaborative, where somebody will come and ask us to go out and observe the dog because they're worried they see something, or work with them through the process if it's their first guide dog retiring. They've never experienced this. So yeah, it's really a case-by-case basis.
Hey, I just real quick, Lauren, just let us know in the chat if we can share those photos on our social channels, because they are kind of fun seeing dogs navigate transportation. And John had a question, which is, what is the training process like to become a guide dog trainer?
Good question. So to become a guide dog trainer is a 3-year apprenticeship. It's a paid apprenticeship. It requires for the apprenticeship and for the being an instructor in the field, it requires many pairs of shoes. That's all I'll say about how many miles we walk every day. So it starts with, at the beginning of the apprenticeship, you're typically training dogs. You're learning how, even if you have trained pet dogs or other kinds of dogs, you're learning how to train guide dogs, and you're learning how to train dogs the way that school does it. All the schools are a little bit different. Again, they have different breeds that have different needs, right? And they might work with somebody who's deafblind, the schools that work with a person who has deaf blindness. So there are some small details that may differ, but basically it's an old style approach, which is you have an instructor over your shoulder with every single dog you got in your hand from the very first dog you get assigned to you. You get assigned to you a string of dogs, and you start, with that instructor over your shoulder, just, hands-on in the process learning. There's also, then you start cycling into working with clients, you observe, and then you start working back and forth, clients and dogs, graduates and dogs, so that, and there are a series of 3 exams. You have to pass 3 exams. And all of these apprenticeships are designed, they're over, they have to meet the specifications, the qualifications of the International Guide Dog Federation for the school to be accredited. So even though there are differences, the basic structure is the same. And then once you're a certified guide dog trainer, instructor, now you're able to work on your own without supervision, doing your job. So
that's great. And Jan had a great question, which is how can cities help folks using guide dogs through better design of crossing areas and transportation? Like, what are some of the common problems and issues that, that you run into that maybe cities and towns could help fix?
So I will say there are some links that I've provided that will show up here for an in-detail search for anybody who wants to learn more about these details. This is an enormous question. I could sit here possibly for several days and answer it. So the short version to meet our time frame is going to be a lot of things are not designed well for people who cannot see. So, approaches to curves, crosswalks that are angled weirdly, a crosswalk that lands at a phone pole on the other side, trash buckets in the wrong places, scooters laying across the road, traffic designs that are meant to move traffic and keep everybody safe that really work only for sighted pedestrians really well. I'm going to share a brief story. I just went to a webinar a couple of weeks ago about traffic crossings and pedestrians. The manual, let's see, the MUTCD, the Manual of Universal, I'm going to say it wrong. It's all about traffic signals and traffic engineering. That's really all about the job of a lot of traffic engineers is to really keep traffic moving safely. We are become so congested, right? So how do we keep traffic moving safely and keep from getting jammed up and everything? So I went to yet another, because we all go to them, discussion and webinar for CEUs about this. And the gentleman who is giving the presentation is a PhD. He's an orientation mobility specialist. He works with deafblind people, and he researches and works on problems of street crossing access and pedestrian access for people who are blind or visually impaired. And there was a change that was going to be made in the New York City pedestrian crossing system. And with modern traffic, if it's all set up with crossings, they can just change with a flick of a button in a little program. They can change all kinds of intersections across the city all at once. So they said, well, we're going to be changing this. And they went to him and said they were so excited it's going to solve all kinds of pedestrian problems. And he said, it will if they're sighted. It won't if they're visually impaired or blind. This is going to cause more problems. And they didn't believe him. So he went out with somebody who is a highly experienced lifetime cane user, highly experienced in the city, in New York City, knows the area well, and brought him to one of these intersections that had just had this change in how they run the light cycle. And so he collected data and brought it back to the traffic people and said, I know you think it's better and it's going to help everybody, but only if you can see, and here's why. And he gave them all this information and they said, oh my gosh. So it's just a lot of work to try to help everybody understand what's so different about things when you cannot see, because you can't see all the different signals happening. You can't, and what line of traffic sounds like it might be appropriate for you to think that, oh, maybe that's this traffic next to me and I could maybe cross with them. And it turns out with modern traffic, there are protected lanes that are automatically running at the same time. Roundabouts are a whole other problem for pedestrians. So it's really, there's a link in this. Thank you. Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Yes, going to get hung up on that. Thank you very much, sir. Maybe that's a traffic engineer.
It is.
It is, right? So there's a lot of collaboration on uniform. There we go. Thank you. Wrong preposition, he says. So there's a lot of collaboration between traffic engineers and the communities of people who work with disabilities and pedestrian groups, but it's a problem because there are millions of cars all over the country. And if that traffic doesn't move promptly and safely, it causes all kinds of other problems. So, how do we address that and still keep in mind? And we're layering modern crossings and modern tools on top of old intersections. You can't take a 50-year-old intersection and think, unless you rip it all out and redo the whole thing, that's going to, be current, that's going to have old stuff. So it's a very confusing field, and there is a lot of collaboration. So it's the traffic engineers know what they're supposed to be doing, but it always, because most people are sighted, that's not their job. It's not their job to know what it means to be as somebody who's blind or in a wheelchair. Then it's the job of the organizations who need to know that. So, the collaborating organizations. So it's a lot of work. It's an ongoing process. There is a website that you can visit. There is Accessible Design is an organization that works with these issues for people who are blind and visually impaired. On there are tons of links to the manual on uniform traffic control devices, to research, to different community groups. There's just a lot of information. I encourage everybody to visit that if you're interested in the problems of being blind with or without a guide dog and navigating. It's a tough world for even sighted pedestrians these days. We have so much more cars than we used to. So many more cars. Yeah. Thank you, Access for Blind. Yep.
Yep. And I had a question, which is, what if a client doesn't make the cut? You mentioned that the clients have to file an application.
Sure, guide dog user or a guide dog applicant, yes.
Yeah. So do they have other options, or is getting a guide dog more, they'll still be able to navigate fine with the white cane,
So you already have to be navigating safely and comfortably with your white cane and your orientation and mobility skills. So how do you orient yourself in the environment? What skills do you have besides your vision that is limited or none, and your cane to give you the information you need? What kind of choices do you have to make? How do you reduce your risks as a pedestrian if you can't see what's around you? So people who apply for dogs are already out there in the world and doing their own thing. The difference that for some people a guide dog provides is efficiency. With a cane, you are forced, because of the cane, to walk a little bit slower to make sure the cane, you use the cane properly to capture all the information, so you don't trip on anything, so you know what's around you. So it's a slower mode of travel than a guide dog. Also, it's very tactile. So if you think of the stereotype we have in our heads of that person moving the cane back and forth in front of them, if you come across a trash can, you will then slowly work your way around the trash can with your cane. It's very tactile. A guide dog is not very tactile. I mean, it is tactile in that your hand is on the harness and your feet are on the ground, but the information, the details you're getting where your cane isn't touching anything, you're not getting that. So the dog just takes you around the obstacle. You might even know it's there. You might not even know it's there. So it's just a different kind of form of travel. It tends to be, and the guide dogs need a lot of work to keep their skills fresh and their behavior in good shape. So if you're not somebody who's going to be out there for a couple of miles a day throughout the day, then it's probably not a good choice. And it's a lot of work to maintain a guide dog. There are many people who choose to not get a dog because of how much work it is, because it's way more work than maintaining a pet. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Jonathan had a question, which is, he's curious if the rectangular rapid flashing beacons with the speech messaging and raised crosswalks have improved the experience at roundabouts with people who are using guide dogs. I know I've stopped at intersections. A lot of four-ways now have the, wait, and,
yes.
Beep, boop, beep, boo, and it's time to walk.
So if there is, for a system like this to reduce the risk for a blind pedestrian, there must be a control that brings traffic to a stop, cross traffic to a full stop, and then there needs to be the verb, the speech messaging that says it's okay to cross. If it's only flashing and it's not bringing traffic to a full stop, there is a higher chance that somebody's going to drive through that because it's not a red light or a stop sign. There's no way to eliminate risks for any of us pedestrians out there, but for someone who can't see anything, they don't necessarily, it's harder. So the speech messaging piece is important, because if traffic has stopped if there's something that guarantees that traffic has come to a full stop and there's a speech message, then that works much better. If it's just the blinking yellow lights where traffic is supposed to see those and stop, and then the speech message is saying it's okay to cross, my question would be, and I have to apologize, Jonathan, I don't know the details of how that particular one works, but if it's saying it's okay to cross because the yellow lights are blinking, traffic still may not stop. They should be, for it to work really well, it should only be saying it's safe to cross when there's a guarantee that traffic has come to a full stop. It states that the yellow lights are flashing. Okay, that's different then. So what's the risk there is what we call gaps in traffic. And that's a risk whether lights are flashing or not, whether it's a stop sign or not, is that if, I shouldn't say a stop sign, I should say like a blinking yellow light. If traffic is consistent and it's a super busy road, thank you, Jonathan. If it's a super busy road and there's traffic and there's traffic and there's traffic, and then traffic comes to a stop, and you know that the only time traffic comes to a stop is because lights are flashing or the traffic light came on, then you know that that silence means it's okay to cross because there's silence, right? There's all these environmental cues. If it's an occasionally busy road, like a lot of our roads are, you've got traffic coming and then it stops. You've got traffic coming and it stops. So are the lights flashing? Like, you don't know as the pedestrian, is it quiet because there's no traffic coming, or is it quiet because traffic has actually seen me and seen the yellow lights and stopped? I just said that wrong. Is it quiet because there's just no traffic, or is it quiet because my presence and my pushing of the button triggered the yellow light and they saw that and they stopped? So it gets more complicated. There are layers of complication. So Jonathan, that is helpful, yes. But again, that's probably very situation dependent, depending on that intersection, that street, that pedestrian, what their skill crossing level is, what their own experiences are. Do they have any remaining vision? It's very variable, which is why people who are O&M specialists really like everything to be, you all stop or you all move, depending on whether you're a pedestrian or a car, because that really reduces the risk a lot. So it's definitely an improvement though.
Well, thank you. I think it's 8 o'clock, so we're at the end of the presentation. I don't know if you want to share the website for Fidelco, if anyone wants to.
I would love to. That's actually in the links that I provided to you all. I just hadn't mentioned it. Sorry, Bill, I totally forgot to mention that one. We are at fidelco.org. So if you go to fidelco.org, you can read about what we do as an organization. You can read about getting a guide dog, puppy raisers. There are podcasts. There are stories about guide dog users. There are stories about puppy raisers. Also, and I don't think I put this in the list, but if you want to learn about other guide dog schools and guide dogs in general, you can go to the website for the International Guide Dog Federation and do a search in your area or what area of the country or the world that you want to learn more about guide dogs in. So a lot of schools out there. And if somebody gets declined by us, by the way, they don't get accepted into our program, they might very well get accepted into a different program.
Oh, that's good
but
to know.
Every school's a little bit different. So, you know, we encourage people to keep applying.
Well, thank you for all your work and that you do to just make life better for people in your community. And you know, I'm excited to see, you know, Alyssa and Carrie on, you know, as well. You know, thank you for your work up in Canada. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining tonight. If you want to rewatch this, we should have it up on our YouTube channel or on our website soon. So that would be another resource you can find. We have all kinds of copies of our past webinars on our webpage as well. So if you want to learn more about how different groups are interacting with the transportation sector, everything from bikes to traffic gardens to animal crossings, we've had a lot of interesting speakers. So check back with us. And Gretchen, thank you again for volunteering your time and sharing with us tonight. It was really wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for having Fidelco here through me. And I loved all the questions. You could probably tell I could talk forever about this. So I just appreciate people who are interested in this and people who are interested in accessible transportation and transportation issues for people who have various, disabilities or extra needs. So thank you so much for paying attention to this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, have a great night, everybody, and hopefully, check back on our website. We may have a session sometime during the summer months, but we'll be back on our regular monthly schedule starting in September. But do check the website to find out more. And thank you so much for attending tonight. Thanks.
Great evening, everybody.